So can you let me point him out to me in the audience? That way, if I can signal him.
You got it. Good morning.
Okay. Well,
Doing well. Ladies and gentlemen, if we'll go ahead, in the essence time, we'll go ahead, or in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and start this morning. I appreciate everybody coming, and we'll call our meeting of the Public Safety Subcommittee of Appropriations to order this morning. We have quite an agenda, and I'm going to ask our Secretary, Chairman Chambers, to call that as we get to it. If the committee would entertain one item not on the agenda, but just in the interest of housekeeping, I'd like us to adopt rules for the subcommittee, which should have been handed out. It appears everybody has a copy but me.
Here they are. Okay.
All right, now those are the committee rules. Where's the other? Planning is everything. Here's a copy of the...
these are our rules here. Okay.
These are just
really tough.
These are very very simple. But if the committee would view those, essentially a quorum will be determined by the chairperson, and then we will use the rule number 2, the rules of the House. Appropriations Committee shall control in the event. Ms. Chambers, if I guess I'm going out of order in presenting these. I should let you preside, and we'll do that if there's an objection. Otherwise, in the interest of time, I'll just move forward. If there's not an objection, I would offer these rules for consideration by the committee and ask the committee's pleasure on the adoption.
I have a motion at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
It is the appropriate time. I have a motion to approve the rules.
So moved.
Is there a second? I have a motion and a second to approve the rules. Is there discussion? Discussion?
One discussion, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
On a note that we were just talking, there are 4 ex officio members of this committee who are scattered hither, skither, and yon. We may need to get those names and get y'all address and a phone number that if they need to come to vote or whatever to be a part of this committee, they need to be notified.
Yeah. I appreciate it. We have those listed on our distribution list. They will be included, as will all the members that are ex officio. All the subcommittee chairs in appropriations are ex officio on our committee as well, and they will be included. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion to approve the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Rules are approved. Thank you very much. Moving on in the agenda this morning, let me just tell everyone I appreciate your time this morning. I know that it was a little scattered last week as we set the time for the meeting. We had originally set it at 1:30, and I think had everyone lined up to come in, and then found out the House was going to convene at 3, and we think the House convening is probably takes precedence over us. But this is a very important meeting. I appreciate everybody's attendance, and we look forward to the presentations that we'll have this morning. I would ask everyone to try to be courteous to our speakers. We're going to try to give them the opportunity to make their presentation, and then if they would just leave a few minutes in the 15-minute block at the end so that the committee can ask questions. Again, this morning we are going to be dealing with the 07 mid-year budget only. The 07 mid-year budget only. With that, we will go right into the agenda. Ms. Chambers?
First up on the agenda is GBI.
either reside here in Georgia or are outside the state victimizing Georgia children. In conjunction with this, later in the legislative session, you will see some legislation which the GBI will be proposing. The governor has approved us to go forward with some measures which will strengthen the laws which relate to internet crimes against children. And this legislation, we hope, will go hand in hand with, if you approve the budget and provide the funding with our unit, and the new law will allow us to have some really tighten up some loopholes we've determined in the current statutes that relate to this type of crime. The third initiative proposed by the governor is the Georgia ID Integrity Initiative, and this initiative is a partnership between the Department of Driver Services and the GBI. It has been both agencies have determined, and the governor has rightly assessed, that there is a problem with fraudulent documents being used to obtain Georgia driver's licenses. Fraudulent documents that these are all manner of documents, from bogus immigration papers to false birth certificates, all manner of legal documents. Our partnership with Driver Services, they have an initiative that Commissioner Dozier will be speaking to, which will hire additional investigators to be placed in his facilities. The GBI's role in this will be to take information from the Driver Services investigators and then for us to track the documents back to the source. Hopefully then we will be able to not only criminally investigate and prosecute people bringing in the fraudulent documents, but to track them back to the source and cut off those tentacles. We have had meetings with the staff of Driver Services as well as staff from the Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, ICE, and they will also be a partner in this. So this is the startup cost, and if this approved in the FY07 budget, will allow us to go forward procuring equipment and getting ready for the initiative to kick off when full funding becomes available. Now, the third initiative is the GBI Meth Force Initiative, and the governor has proposed this. This will double the size of the GBI Meth Force. As you recall, the General Assembly funded last year 15 agents to be dedicated to working methamphetamine and related crimes. Those agents have been employed, they have been trained, and they are currently on the street. This initiative will add an additional 15 to that. We can point I don't know, often we're able to look at and point very distinctly to a piece of legislation that had a dramatic impact upon crime. But we could do that in the instance of the legislation passed 2 years ago by the General Assembly, which restricted pseudoephedrine, which is the main ingredient in methamphetamine, as is produced in the small labs. We went in Georgia from having 29 small labs seized up to nearly 800. That's how fast it escalated up. The General Assembly, when you enacted the legislation which restricted pseudoephedrine, that has made a major impact in the number of small labs which are being seized in Georgia. Through a combination of aggressive law enforcement at the local and state level, coupled with the strict new law, we have seen a dramatic decrease in the number of meth labs that are being seized in Georgia. Now, what has happened is on one hand, while we've reduced the number of meth labs that are being seized by law enforcement, there's been an increase in the amount of methamphetamine which is being imported into the state. So we're shifting on the state level. We are shifting our strategy from working the labs, which required immediate response, to now partnering with the Drug Enforcement Administration to address the importation of methamphetamine. It is our analysis and the analysis of DEA that 90% of the methamphetamine being used in Georgia is imported from Mexico, and that's occurring because of the Atlanta being the transportation hub of the Southeast, it's logical that the drug importers are using the transportation system that's coming into Georgia, and then it's being distributed out not only in this state but to the Southeast. So the 15 agents, if they're funded by the General Assembly, they will go into working the distribution rings at this high level. And we've made plans to partner very strongly with the DEA to address this and join in with their efforts to combat the methamphetamine importation. Mr. Chairman, that's a summary of the GBI FY07 budget and outline of 3 initiatives proposed by the governor.
Thank you, sir. We do have a few questions, and I'm going to try to follow the order. I may not know which number matches up if you're far from the center, but I believe the first question we have, Chairman Day, you're number 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ken, thanks for being here before us. This might not fit this particular year. It might fit, but given your current staff, your workforce, when you come for the 208 budget, would you bring what you think is an appropriate amount, what the market price is for your employees, especially field agents, and your lab scientists that you currently have?
Okay. I'm sorry. You're looking for what information?
I'd like to know how much it would cost to get the current cost, going to salaries. Let me start over. Going to salaries. It's my understanding that your field agents and that your lab scientists are below market and that they're leaving.
That's correct.
And that it would cost more to keep them. Mr. Chairman, please correct me if I'm wrong, but is there any way you could supply that information to the committee?
Absolutely. We had actually prepared a white paper on the retention issues that for GBI agents and crime lab scientists. We have no difficulty recruiting scientists and agents. Our problem comes in with retention of those specific positions when they reach the level of 5 to 7 years. And in our white paper, we laid out the cost for our proposed solution to the retention problem, which for the first year would cost $3.4 million, and then for the second year would cost $492,000, and the third year would be $478,000, and that would addresses the lack of salaries, lack of competitive salaries, as well as the impact on raising those salaries on the supervisory ranks. So that was an entire package.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next question we had, Chairman Knox.
What have y'all given any consideration, because of the problem with the funding on the personnel at the lab? Have y'all given any consideration to privatizing that instead of it being carried around in your budget?
Yes, sir.
Science is science is science. It shouldn't make any difference who's running it or operating it.
Yes, sir. We actually 2 years ago, the General Assembly had funded the GBI $3 million to do outsourcing of our cases to private laboratories, and using that funding along with hiring some additional staff, we virtually eliminated the backlog in the crime lab. But the answer to your question is this: there are very few private laboratories that are larger than the GBI, and they have our problem we found with the outsourcing of cases was that the private laboratories do not have capacity to handle the volume of cases that we turn out. In fact, we could have eliminated the backlogs much quicker if there were private laboratories that could handle our cases. The other problem we run into with doing private scientists doing the work is that they do not want to come to court. And but part of our budget of the $3 million for the outsourcing was for expert testimony. And to give you an example of how this works, we can have a drug test completed at our private laboratory at the cost of $250. Very reasonable. But if we have to have that scientist to come to court to testify, then it costs $1,500 a day, expert testimony. The private laboratories also hire their staffing when they get a contract. If they don't have a contract with our state or another one, those scientists go on to other work. So we've looked at the issue very closely, and we were successful with the $3 million. But it is a problem. I wish
we didn't solve it with that $3 million. Is my point.
Sir,
I said we didn't solve it with that $3 million, and we're not going to solve it with another $3 million probably.
No, sir. The absolute answer to this is to have adequate staffing in the state crime laboratory and a stabilized workforce.
Okay. Second question is about the meth task force.
Yes, sir.
What reason do we have to be optimistic that we're going to reduce the overall use of drugs, whether meth or other forms of drugs, by this initiative? I mean, when you look at the studies I've seen, you know, we all the stuff we do it over here and it pops up over there. And basically, drug use has stayed about the same for 40 years in spite of, involving the armed forces and the GBI and the FBI and the ABC and the GGG and everybody and their dog in the drug fight. And we're ending up basically with this. It's not a war on drugs, which we've heard about. It's a war on people who use drugs. Question is, why should we think that yet another program is going to make a real change in the drug use in this country?
It's an excellent question, and
If I might,
yes,
just in the interest, and that's a good question. If you would take just a second to answer, and we have three more questions. I'm going to try to keep us on point. Chairman Knox, I think that's something we might invite the director back later this week if he has time, and that's something I think the committee would really like to look at because it is a longer term solution. So if you could give the chairman sort of a recap, and then we'll.
I'll reserve my question then until.
If you wouldn't mind, Director, we'd move on and have him back. Is that all right,
sure.
Chairman?
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Next, Chuck Sims. Tom.
Mr. Commissioner, my question is, how are your labs getting the work turned out? And are you having problems meeting the criteria for speedy trial? And with these things, are people getting off because you can't get it back out to them, or that's the other issue?
We track the submissions to the crime laboratory and the output that we have, and we have virtually eliminated the backlog. Now, there's certain evidence that requires a longer length of time to process, and what we consider a case in the backlog is when it comes into the GBI 30 days after we receive that evidence, then we want to have it completed and a report go out to the agency. Some testing requires longer, but with the combination of for 2 years in a row, the legislature provided us with new scientists, 17 one year, 20 the next, $3 million in outsourcing. We virtually eliminated the backlog. And there's always going to be some level of backlog because cases come into us in batches, and we'll fluctuate between 2,000, 3,000 cases in the backlog. But we're able to turn them out. Now, here's the problem. You got to have to keep the backlog from growing and being present. You have to have adequate staffing, which we do at the present time, but you have to have a stable workforce. When we have a scientist, a DNA scientist or drug chemist that leaves us and goes to another agency or to a private sector, we have to start the training process all over again. Some of these scientists require 24 months of training period. So when a scientist leaves us, we immediately replace them because we don't lack for applicants, but we have to begin that training process. And while they're in training, they're not generating out completed cases. So if we continue to have a turnover in the crime lab scientist ranks, we'll see the backlog grow back up, even with the amount of staffing we have, because the scientists will be in training.
You're saying that follow-up question, then
my follow-up is that you're saying that there are cases that you can't get out, and that are going to drop through the cracks. Maybe not the high profile, but some, and these folks are going to get off because we can't get them out.
I won't say they'll get off. I won't say they'll get off. But when there's a delay in generating a report, when there's a delay in completing an evidence analysis, that impacts upon investigations. That impacts upon prosecution. But we have made major improvements through the help of the General Assembly here.
Thank you. We have two more folks that have a question. I want to give them the opportunity, but if I could, again, we're 07. All of the questions are good, and I think the director can come back and we can drill down on the agency. I think there's some things we need to do. Everybody so far has asked a longer-term question for the agency, but if we could try to focus on 07, we've got a full day on that. Representative Powell.
Thank you. Vernon, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you, sir.
What's the department's authorized employment numbers?
Well, I've got it, but it's buried in here.
Just curious about what are y'all authorized for, and how many unfilled vacancies do y'all have currently?
In the investigative division, which is where the special agents are at, we're authorized 240. We have 249.
The budget shows, the little budget shows 813. That's probably across the entire gamut of the organization.
That's all three divisions and administration. Okay. Read it out. I can't read it.
President Powell, you're looking for what authorized positions versus how many they actually have seats in the chair, if you will.
How many do we have unfilled?
We have approximately unfilled 114 agency-wide.
There are 50 vacancies in the special agent ranks.
114 agents?
50. But we are in the...
That's for all states. That's for all positions.
Yeah.
Special agents?
If I could, I think let him follow up on that. But I think what we would like to see, again, putting words in your mouth, Representative, but you'd like to know what's vacant by position, by department or division. Is that correct?
Sure.
If you could get that for
we will get that to you.
Did you have a follow-up, Representative? Okay. Thank you. Chairman Weller. Okay. Well, that's all the question we have. We thank you very much for your presentation. If you could get back with us on that,
I will.
And we'll contact you. I'll get with the committee, and we'd like to have you back. I think for probably an extended conversation, and what we can do long term for the agency.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Chambers.
We'll have the vacancy information to you today.
Ms. Chambers.
Thank you, Director Keenan. AOC is next.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kelly's handing out for you right now some one-page descriptions of the items that we have in the amended budget. I'm assuming you just want me to go down. It's under Judicial Council, so it's more than just the AOC that we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about some of the programs under the Judicial Council. The first one is to provide funds for Westlaw for the Council of Magistrate Court Judges at $20,000, and you'll see the second one is to provide Westlaw for the Council of Probate Court Judges. What that does is, for both of those classes of court, provides them all with access to Westlaw. And that page description will kind of lay out how many seats that is and what the annual cost is. The third item is $65,000 to provide funds for a new guardianship video. The probate code changed a couple of years ago, and I know Chairman Willard was instrumental in that change, and a lot of the terminology in the guardianship code changed to conservatorship and those kind of things. And the probate court had previously produced a video that's shown in the courthouses around the state. So what they'd like to do is to update that video with the new requirements of that new revised statute to go out to all of the courts on DVD so that folks going into probate court can watch that video and know what they need to do. The next item is to provide funds for the Georgia Courts Automation Commission for software certification. The Georgia Courts Automation Commission has been doing strategic planning with every level of court to develop standards for software certification. A lot of these courts handle traffic tickets and citations that need to be electronically submitted to the Department of Driver Services. And so in this strategic planning, they're trying to come up with minimum software standards for all of the vendors that provide those case management systems to those different levels of court. The next to the last item is to provide funds to the County Municipal Probation Advisory Council for an increased workload due to Senate Bill 44. I don't know if any of you remember, but last year there was legislation passed. Right now the County and Municipal Probation Advisory Council oversees private probation in Georgia. And last year there was legislation passed that included city and county run probation departments in that oversight. So that's doubling their workload, checking backgrounds on probation officers, and that would be to add some staff. We only have one staff person for that council that is trying to process all those applications, background checks, and do compliance monitoring. And really, now that they have included the cities and counties along with the private probation, those are misdemeanor probation services in the state of Georgia. So that would be all misdemeanor probation is now being overseen by that council. So they need some relief with some additional staff to do compliance monitoring. The very last item is to provide additional state funds for a match for a grant for federal funds for the Child Placement Project. The Child Placement Project works with the juvenile courts to improve the timelines between permanency placement for children and work on abuse and neglect cases, doing training for juvenile court judges. That project was funded by the federal government. We've had funding for about 10 years. Last year, the federal government increased the amount of funding available to Georgia to $1 million, but we have to provide a 25% match in order to pull down that funding. So that's what this represents, are two positions that will be the match to pull down that federal funding, and we anticipate that we will continue to receive that federal funding for the next 5 years. And so that's to work solely with the juvenile courts. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. The committee have any questions in regards to these items? Chairman Chambers.
When was the Automation Commission going to be able to complete its work? Do you anticipate?
Director Ratley is here, and he's a member of GCAC, and so he goes to all of the meetings, so I'm going to let him answer that question. He can probably better answer it for you.
Thank you.
Judge Tim Pape from Rome Juvenile Court chairs the committee, and I'll attempt to answer your question in his absence. I'm not really sure that the work of the Georgia Courts Automation Commission will ever end. Projects end, but the work of the commission doesn't. Automation has become more and more a part of the Georgia court system over the last decade, and of necessity I think it will be even more a part as we proceed down the road. The commission's statutory charge is to establish policies and procedures, rules and regulations, and technical and performance standards for automation in the Georgia court system. That's a pretty broad charge. The commission no longer involves itself in specific projects or providing software to the various classes of courts or individual courts or what have you, but is relegating its role to more of a policy making and a facilitating activity. As Ms. Nesbitt mentioned, the Georgia Courts Automation Commission has facilitated meetings with the technology committees and the executive committees of each of the classes of courts, superior, state, probate, magistrate, juvenile, municipal, and so on and so forth, to get those groups together to agree on some automation standards within those classes of courts. Now, the long-range plan is once we get the individual classes of courts to agree on what data elements they need, then to get them all together to see what common data elements exist and to evolve a system that everybody has access to and that everybody feels like serves the needs of their particular court. This budget request, as Ms. Nesbitt indicated, is for the continuation of a software certification program. And some of my colleagues wince when I use the analogy of the good housekeeping seal of approval. But in some respects, I think that's what it might very well be. We have a number of software vendors that come in and out of this state selling software programs to courts at every level. We have a number of very competent in-state vendors that offer the same services. What GCAC is trying to do is to develop a test model so that we can test all this software and we can give a court some assurance if it buys a certain software package that software package does what the court needs it to do, and that also produces the kind of information that's needed by the Department of Driver Services and so on and so forth. And it sounds pretty simple, but it's actually a pretty complex undertaking. We have the work going on that project, the technical work going on at Columbus State University, and they have a test lab there. But that is an ongoing project of GCAC, and it's a very worthy undertaking, very necessary. But it's taking a lot longer than we thought it was going to take. And time's money with this kind of project.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I think we have a few. Chairman Rawson, is that you down there, 28?
And this question's for either one of you, but who is the Office of Dispute Resolution attached to now for budget purposes?
Under the Judicial Council.
Okay.
It's still a Supreme Court project, but it's under the Judicial Council.
Thank you.
Question. I'm looking on this private probation, and just wanted to ask a question. What's going on with all the fees that these folks get? Private probation seems to get a lot of fees because I get folks coming in my office end up back in jail because they can't get a job, and they put them back in the county jail, and then they get out of the county jail and they got to pay the fee, and they go back because they can't get a job because they don't have a driver's license or whatever. And it's just continuing on and on. What's going on with all these fees? What are they using their money for?
Well, the private probation companies are just that, private companies, and so there is no set amount for what they can charge as far as what the probation supervision fees are. Those companies negotiate contracts with individual courts or city governments in the case of a municipal court, and with the various county commissioners to set what that supervision fee will be. So we don't really get involved in, or the council doesn't really get involved in what the actual supervision fee is. They're more regulating to make sure that the folks are using a standard contract is set out by the rules and that they're abiding by the rules and regs. But those contracts are actually negotiated at a local level. And for the cities and counties, I'm assuming that has to be approved by the governing authority, which would be the county commissioners or the mayors or the city councils.
Why is this? It says no funding was allocated by the legislature to provide for the increase in cost of complying with the new law of Senate Bill 44. What's that costing us? I mean, why aren't they paying this? They're making money off folks here in Georgia?
That's been a fairly controversial issue. We did, I think, in Terry Bernard's, that bill came out of Chairman Bernard's committee. We have attempted to charge a minimal registration fee to help offset that cost. And that was fairly controversial with the companies. They did end up approving a nominal fee, but it in no way, the registration fee will in no way pay the entire cost of regulating that industry. And that's something that's a policy issue that the legislature would need to determine. We don't really have the authority to go in and say they need to pay for their self-regulation. That would be a policy decision by the legislature. But meanwhile, we have a double increased workload, and we need to run background checks, we need to do applications, and we need to do compliance checks on all of the existing companies in cities and counties.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask her to maybe come back later too on some of the subject matter? I know it's for times of essence here.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, let me just say that we're going to meet briefly tomorrow as a committee to discuss after our meeting today what you folks want to hear again. So we'll take that note, and thank you, Representative Sims. We'll move on. Have number 19. Is that you, Chairman? Or number 19. I'm sorry, Chairman Bernard.
Ms. Nesbitt, I actually was going to ask a question similar to what Representative Sims had asked on this Senate Bill 44. Vaguely what I remember is, if I remember this all correctly, there was an amendment attached to Senate Bill 54 which would require the compliance of this, the city, county, municipal associations come under. Of course, no mention of additional funds were going to be required from what I can remember at the time. Correct me if I'm wrong. But what I'm curious at this point, now we've gone a few months into the process, is the benefit outweighing the cost, I guess, is a question.
Well, we have the city and county folks registered now, and it's really too early because it went into effect in July. It's really kind of early, and the first registration round was not until October. Mm-hmm. So it's really still kind of early to really tell that. And I think that we did provide estimates on an increased cost of what the additional workload, because this bill actually started 3 or 4 years ago. A similar bill was introduced, and we provided the cost estimates at that time as well. But we have one staff person, trying to handle that all of the registration and background checks for all of those people, and that does represent all misdemeanor probation in the state of Georgia. And we do have complaints. As Representative Sims talked about, we get those same calls from constituents about supervision fees and mamas and wives, and we're getting those same calls.
Yeah, that's fine. I guess, and just the final follow-up, I guess the question then comes back is, and maybe we can't resolve this right this moment, but something that a line of thinking now that we see that there's a cost involved with that might actually continue. Once again, is the program, would it be better to actually repeal that particular amendment, I guess is what I'm saying. Let's go back to where we were at.
Again, that's a policy decision for the legislature.
Mr. Chairman, I'll pass.
Thank you. Ms. Nesbitt, I'm going to talk about something a little different. I'm looking at your tracking sheet and something we haven't talked about, but I did ask about this the other day in appropriations. The various judicial branches, including your office, is putting through for a 4% pay raise, where everyone else throughout the state has come in and asked for a 3% pay raise. And I want to know, where was the decision made to do something different? Because I assume a word came down from governor's office or wherever that says we're going to be recommending 3%. So why was a 4% put in for all the judicial?
Well, the Appropriations Act last year said between 2% and 4%.
That's not I'm asking the question specifically why, when everyone else is put in for 3%, regardless of what was put in as far as a range last year, we had 3% across the board.
The decision was made at all of the levels of court, from the Supreme Court down through the prosecuting attorneys, to go for the 4% raise. Most of the folks, most of our budget is personal services. The majority of that budget is constitutional officers that were at 2.89, and they felt like that would even out with 4% for staff. But
are we saying that each department individually made its own decision to go for a 4% as opposed to a decision being made in the Office of Administrative Courts to do so?
Right, every different department, yes, made their own decision about what the raise would be.
Ms. Nesbitt, I thank you for the presentation. I think we do want to, we'll schedule some time, additional time before the committee, obviously, perhaps to talk about this and as well as 08. One thing, let me just ask that I'd like to look at in the tracking document 6.4.4, the automation that Chairman Chambers asked about, the software certification. There's a lot of different ways that's accomplished. Software 20 years myself, and I think we'd like to know really what that means. You know, who gets paid for that? You know, not today, but a little bit further definition.
We have some notice that Judge Pape, who's the chair of that commission, can be there, but you know he had to be on the bench today.
Certainly.
But I would really prefer that he be here because
certainly. We understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
All right, we're going to have some real fun now because we've got Public Defenders Council.
Hi, how are you doing?
Poor Michael went through the other day in appropriations. You have to be gentle with him today, I think.
I can only guess that there may be a number of questions, Mr. Mayor, regards this. So go through your budget, and I suspect we're in, for a discussion before the committee for longer than 15 minutes at some point in the future. But if you'd just give us the highlights today and take a couple of questions, we would appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the opportunity to come back in anticipation of a number of questions that I'm sure this committee has, and rightly so. We are providing as much information in this folder that Mr. Smith has handed out to you as possible. Mr. Chairman, our FY07 request is for $9.5 million, which is not an enhancement of our budget, but basically a continuation of the budget that we started with. As you recall, Mr. Chairman, from our discussion the other day, our agency is limited in the source of revenue that we can use for each year's budget. And that lies at the heart of why we're coming back for $9.5 million. We've already reduced our FY07 budget by $5 million because of the limitations on what we can expect, or what we can ask for. The continuation of our budget would bring us up to the level at which we were approved through the budget offices and the Legislative Oversight Committee, so that we can continue out this year's work. We have 43 circuit defender offices throughout the state. We have 422 state-paid employees and 338 employees in those offices that are paid by county funds that are paid from the counties to cover those salaries. In order to continue providing services at the level which we have done for this first part of this year, we need the $9.5 million to finish out the year. I would note that just as sort of a footnote to this request, we are required to provide, by the legislation, we are required to provide representation in superior courts and juvenile courts throughout the state for any person who is an indigent who is facing possible imprisonment for their crimes. Director Keenan made an excellent point when he was presenting the GBI budget, and he talked about the more aggressive stance that the GBI has made with methamphetamine prosecutions. We're on the tail end of that. The more prosecutions, the more we have to be in court, the more attorneys we have to have. So I point that out, Mr. Chairman, just to point out that we're not trying to wag the dog. We are the tail. And we have to bring up, after the prosecutions are made, we have to be there. We don't have a choice. And this request that we have is been collected through these funds that I'd outlined, the sources of 10% add-on to the criminal and traffic fines, the 10%, a $15 add-on to the civil filing fees, the 10% on all bails and bonds up to a $50 cap, and the $50 application fee, which is collected through probation offices, now primarily as a result of legislation y'all passed last year. Mr. Chairman, that's our request. I don't want, you've got large packet of information there. I'd be glad to try to answer any further questions. But basically, as simple as I can make it, we need $9.5 million to finish out this year and continue the budget that we started with at the beginning of the year.
Thank you. Chairman Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How are you this morning?
Just fine, Chairman Day.
What would happen if you didn't get the $9.5 million?
We would have to close down some of the offices, the circuit defender offices and the conflict offices. The representation that those offices are providing would then go back to the counties. The judges would be facing the dilemma that they have a person in their courtroom who's indigent and needs an attorney. If we can't do it, then logically it falls back on the counties. Now, the counties have been pushing us, and rightly so, to take on more and more responsibility to remove the burden off the taxpayers in the counties, which are primarily funded, as you know, by property taxes. And when the Indigent Defense Act of 2003 was passed, there was a lot of anticipation that the state would continue to take on more and more responsibility for these cases. As it is right now, the counties are still providing about 60% of the cost. I would like to point out, Chairman Day, if I could, in response to that at the same time that the Indigent Defense Act provided for a statewide public defender system to provide representation in superior and juvenile courts, Shelton versus Alabama came down from the United States Supreme Court that requires attorneys to be appointed in any case where jail is a possibility. Prior to Shelton versus Alabama, probation revocation cases were not being appointed attorneys. And the more we use probation, the more revocations we're going to have. And we are caught in the middle of having to provide representation now in probation revocation, and so are the counties. It was a very unfortunate timing for us and the Supreme Court. But if we can't provide the funding, it's going to fall back on the counties.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. I wrestle sometimes with, if the state did not grow the community or the county community of prisoners or suspects or whatever, why should the state be responsible for this? Why shouldn't it be, if it's created in the county, why shouldn't the county take up the cost?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I can answer that question other than to say that the county has always been seen as a division of the state government, and particularly with regard to prosecution.
As a division?
A subunit of state government, because the prosecutions by district attorneys in each county are brought in the name of the state, and the state is actually prosecuting these cases. And so there is a almost symbiotic relationship between the counties and the state when it comes to prosecution and defense.
All right, further questions? Chairman Knox.
I suppose that you have looked at every opportunity and every place that you can look to try to cut costs in order to make it through this financial crisis in the event that, suppose we don't have the money. I mean, it could be that the state may actually not have the money. I know that's hard for anybody to contemplate, but, sometimes governments run out of money too. Hadn't happened yet, but it could. But theoretically, do you have like a go-to plan in case you don't get any money or you don't get all the money that you're going to need in order to survive the crisis, I guess?
Chairman Knox, we have looked at every alternative other than not providing services, and what we have is a bare bones budget. I know you hear that from every agency head that comes before you, but I really mean it. We have looked at every way to cut costs. We've shifted costs to the counties wherever we can by entering into these contracts to provide additional services. The legislation provides that the state will give one assistant public defender for each superior court judge and an investigator and an admin person. That's all the state is paying for in this budget, and the rest of those costs have to come from the county. What we have done, Chairman Knox, is to devise a way to try to weather through this immediate dilemma. And let me point out, this is a one-time dilemma that we will not be facing next year, we anticipate, because this is the first year in which we had that overlap of only a 9-month collection of funds. Next year, we should be okay. This is a one-time dilemma, but we've got to address it. If we don't get the funding, we will probably will not be able to make the April 15th payroll. What we've devised is a way to cut back gradually to try to save us and stretch it out as long as we can. But what we would end up doing is not taking any conflict cases. Now, I've told the Superior Court judges this. Conflict cases are a tremendous burden on the system, and the legislation requires us to take conflict cases. About 12 to 13% of all cases that we open each year, that's out of around 100, almost 190 cases this past year, 12 to 13% of those are conflict cases. We have responsibility for those also. So the first thing we would have to do is cut the conflict case. We would not be able to provide representation. Those are the cases that we usually farm out to individual attorneys. We would tell the judges, you've got to pick up these conflict cases. I suspect that some of the judges will look at me and say, you've got to provide it under this legislation. I've already got my toothbrush and my toiletries ready for a contempt citation because I anticipate some of the judges may want to go that route. I hope we don't get to that point. I'm trusting that we'll be able to work this out, and with the help of the Legislative Oversight Committee and other people, I'm very hopeful that we'll get that done. But that's our first level, Chairman Knox. The next thing, if we can't work it out by March the 15th, we'll have to close the circuit defender offices. And that's not a threat. That's just simply a reality that we can't make the April 15th payroll. I am convinced that we will be able to work it out, and with the help of the legislators who understand this problem, which I know y'all do, I think we'll be able to overcome this. And once again, this is a one-time problem that we're facing because of the structure of the legislation.
Mr. Mears, I don't see any further questions. I want to, weigh in on this as a one-time. I mean, you may see it as a one-time thing, and again, this is not about you or I or anybody on the committee or anything personal. I see it as a major challenge. I see it as a something that's traveling through the system that is a major challenge. I personally have the opinion that judges in many cases, when they don't have to sign the checks, are pulling the trigger on what their interpretation of a constitutional level of defense is, and the taxpayers, whether they be paying it through property tax or income tax or whatever tax they pay in the state of Georgia, are picking up the tab. And I guess that's not really a budgetary question, but it is absolutely a policy question. I've talked with some folks on your staff, and I really feel like this. I feel like this budget could explode, and I feel like it could be a budget that could, drain resources over and above, what the fees are collecting, or somebody's going to have to come back in and ask for additional add-ons. So there's two things, as I mentioned the other day when we were in the big meeting, is one, I want to make sure, and with due respect to you in your office, that we are doing the most, taking the most advantage of it. The efficiencies of the office, and number two, based on your expertise and the expertise of your staff, that we look at what we're having to fund as a state, and funding a constitutional level of defense as defined by a reasonable person. Not to say any of the distinguished folks sitting on the bench aren't reasonable, but everybody has an opinion, and there ought to be a consensus what a reasonable constitutional level of defense is, because I just find this to be one of those untenable situations where somebody's writing the check and somebody else has to cash it, and we're caught in the middle. So we're going to work with you on it. I certainly am under the impression we'll find a way to make it work, but I want you to I'd like to ask you and your staff for your commitment to work with us how to fix what I consider to be at least a cracked, if not broken, policy.
Chairman Martin, I pledge to you in all sincerity, we want to work with you. We are a creation of the legislature. We're your creation, and we actually want y'all to be as proud of the public defender system as we are. We're already being used as a model, not necessarily the funding model, but as the structural model. We're being used by other states, and we want the legislature to be proud of what you created.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Secretary Chambers in here. Next, we have driver services.
Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can, I'm going to ask Michelle to hand out a few graphs. I realize we're a little behind schedule, and I'll try to be as brief as I can. But I do want to thank the legislature as well as the governor for the support over the last couple of years with a new agency and with the focus being on customer service as well as balancing the integrity of our product, because we have a unique role that oftentimes individuals don't realize. We're a major player in the homeland security of this nation, as well as someone that everyone's constituent and every single citizen of this state comes to see at some point in their life. As you're well aware, we have about 6 million drivers in the state, but what you often don't think about is how often those drivers come to see us. Each year we see approximately 3 million drivers in our centers, and over 600,000 customers use our online services. So the funding that was provided in the last couple of years with additional services in our centers, additional positions for our centers, as well as the additional resources for our online services has made a tremendous difference, and I just thank you and applaud you for your efforts. Last year I came to this committee and was very proud that December represented the first month we'd hit 90% of our customers served within 30 minutes. I'm proud to say that this year we have stayed constant for the year, and we have not dropped below that 90% level since December of last year when I came to you at that time, and we actually hit an all-time high of 3 straight months of 97% of all our customers being served within that 30-minute parameter. Having said that, I really think the governor's recommendation to you guys represent making sure that we continue to focus on both homeland security as well as customer service. It's an interesting balance, but I think the 3 items that have been submitted to you fall into those categories. The first item on your list is $600,000 for the feasibility study of a new license system, and that will actually fund 2 things. One is the feasibility study, but the other is we're in the process of redesigning our driver's license. That's a separate system. We've talked to you about it before for the last few years, an RFP for our driver's license system that produces the card that you have in your wallet or in your purse. We, by state law as well as by mandate, and we think that it makes perfect sense, are required to hire an independent validation verification, if I got that right, an IV&V vendor to oversee that process, to make sure that we meet our timelines, to make sure that as far as technology, we all know that both in the private and in the government sector, IT projects typically fall behind timeline and also are overpriced. This vendor comes in and helps manage that product and make sure we meet both our deadlines as well as meet the price goal as far as that project goes. So this $600,000 will actually fund 2 things. It will fund the IV&V vendor, of which we're currently the independent validation and verification vendor, which we currently are in the process of selecting. And it'll also give us the opportunity to do a feasibility study on our mainframe system, which houses all the data for every driver. Currently we have a legacy system. It's COBOL written. It was last rewritten in 1998. And if you think about the complexity of a system like this, because every law, every rule that is changed each year when it's related to a driver's license, the conviction, we must go back through, and the thousands and thousands of line we have to reprogram. And after each year of reprogramming that, you have a choice of either going back in and rewriting the current system, make sure that it's flowing effectively and efficiently, or you look to see if there's a new type of platform that we need to go to. What we found is most states across the nation replace these systems, like I just talked about, every 5 years. We're into our 6th or 7th year here. And what we would like is somebody to advise us of whether we need to rewrite the current legacy system or do like many other states and go to a server-based system or a hybrid system, which is a server and a mainframe-based system. Several different states are doing that, Indiana, Texas. This is something that provides better customer service and better security for our system. The next item is one that's related directly to the customers as they walk into our centers. We have a great opportunity to partner with Loganville and Clayton County. Walton County, which is Loganville, as many of you probably are aware, had one of the highest growth in population. The state was growing, I think, at about 1.9% each year. Last year, Walton County alone grew by 5%. We do not have a facility in there. The local community has decided to partner with the state and actually have already passed their SPLOS fund to fund a 8,500 square foot facility as well as paving an asphalt area to do CDL testing. We have been trying to make sure we don't lose sight on CDL testing. We have 6 centers today that do CDL testing, commercial driver's license testing. And we feel like we have some gaps across the state. And this will not only provide a licensing center for that community, but it will also provide a gap for commercial driver's license testing. Clayton County has offered similar. They are providing the facility, a much smaller one at 3,000 square feet, but based on the size of the community, it will be very suitable. What they've asked the state to do is provide the actual operating cost as well as the equipment to run those facilities. So it's a great partnership, one that we think makes great business sense, both as far as location and as well as financial. And we're happy to see the governor recommend that and hope to get support from the General Assembly in that. The last item we have is one that Director Keenan talked about, and that's 10 investigator positions that's related to the Governor's Secure ID initiative. Last year we had over 800 cases of fraud that were identified. Our current process is we have 10 investigators who serve in headquarters, and what happens is every single one of our license examiners are trained in fraudulent document recognition. When a customer comes in that has something that's been identified as a fraudulent document, we capture those documents. We actually take the picture of the individual, take the license or ID card, retain those documents, send them to headquarters to be analyzed, then an investigator goes out to the field. So we had over 800 cases of those last year. Our goal is as usual, if it's a true situation of fraud, we cannot find that individual because we're being more reactive versus proactive. The goal is it's very easy to identify where most of the fraudulent activity is. It moves around the state. Our goal is to have these 10 investigators out in the field. They will be located at the high impact areas. They will be moving. They'll be transient, meaning that as the community of violators move around, we will move around. And the biggest impact of this is we have jurisdiction on those who walk in and try to impersonate someone else or have fraudulent documents. What we don't have jurisdiction over is what Director Keenan talked about, is actually going to the source. We have a lot of cases which we do today send over the information to our partners, but we don't actually tie together and work together as we are going to through this initiative. We hear about flea markets that produce fraudulent documents, such as the passports, such as the birth certificates, such as the license themselves. We do not have jurisdiction over that. That's where Director Keenan and his staff will come into play. We also, today, we have a way to call ICE, the federal government partners of ours, to see if documents are fraudulent or not, but we don't have access to their database to everything that they have available. Through this partnership that we're creating in the Georgia Secure ID initiative, we will actually have a couple of my staff, a couple of Director Keenan's staff, and one of immigration staff working together so that we have direct connection to all those resources as far as the databases that the federal government has as well as the state has, and have a collaborative effort to take that and move it out. We had a great case that kind of shows this. We had a case where we had fraudulent Puerto Rican birth certificates that were moving around the state. We identified that. We were able to work with our state partners and actually take it to the next level, but we were able to trace that back to who was producing those fraudulent documents. And that's a case that this type of initiative will actually have a huge impact. Mr. Chairman, that ends the 3 items that the governor's recommended, and we ask your support of those, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'm sorry, I have 3 lights. I'm not sure the order, but we'll get them all in. I'll start with Chairman Jill Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here and all the good hard work. I know starting up a new department's been labor-intensive.
Yes, ma'am.
And moving all that.
Thank you.
I want to ask you to come back to us later and talk to us. You said you prosecuted 800 cases of fraudulent documents, people trying to get driver's licenses last year. I'm of the personal belief that you could probably prosecute 800 out of DeKalb County alone on an annual basis. And I know that because as I was campaigning this past season, I met dozens and dozens and dozens of people who were registered to vote, but who were not citizens of the United States. And they got that by going and getting a driver's license and being registered to vote through Motor Voter. Now, this is an area where ID and documentation is going to be very important. So it's obvious that some of the employees on the front line at DDS, or DMV as they were before, have been giving people driver's licenses who are not citizens, who are not here legally, and the only way they could do that is through fraudulent documents. And what are you going to do to beef that up with your secure ID and your 10 motor vehicles? I mean, that right there, quite frankly, is not going to be enough to deal with just DeKalb and Fulton County alone, or Gwinnett.
Yes, ma'am. It's a great foundation. What we're currently doing is there's a lot newer technologies out that will help identify those documents. We realize that hopefully it's not as many as you feel that are out there that are getting through, but we do realize that we don't have a perfect system. So there's always room for improvement on identifying those documents and being proactive. And we think one of the areas of being proactive is there's some new equipment that actually takes all of your documents, and it has a system which scans it. It looks like a small scanner, and you can actually place a birth certificate or things of that nature, and when it scans it, it's already preloaded with all the security features in it. So on the surface it may appear to be a true document to the naked eye, but some of the security features that you have to know about exactly, even though we've been trained in those, you may overlook one or something like that with a naked eye. This equipment will actually identify that and tell us whether or not it is a true document or not. We do not have that equipment yet, but we're looking to move forward and start piloting that equipment and try to integrate it into our system. But we're looking at initiatives in that area continuously to try to help us identify the documents. The other thing is with Secretary Handel in office, we've been already talking to her staff about securing up motor voter and things that she has on her initiatives as far as how we can make this a better system. We think we're doing a good job, but there's always room for improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Curious about the customer service centers that are being, I guess, co-sponsored with those counties. That's Loganville or the cities of Loganville and Clayton County. Are those already up and running?
No, sir, they are not.
Well, what would be the impact if you actually shifted that 322 over to the 08 as opposed to being funded here in the 07?
I believe it's the governor's intent to use the one-time cost in the amended budget, and as far as operation goes, should not have a huge impact in our operation, but I believe it's a fiscal policy that the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget tried to identify the one-time costs that weren't reoccurring and go ahead and fund that in this amended budget cycle, and I believe you see that in several agencies.
Okay, thanks, sir. Chairman Day.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Director, Commissioner. First off, a big compliment. My son went to get his driver's license and came back and said, Dad, it only took me 5 minutes. And they gave him more time to go out and date later that evening. But anyway, you've done a great job with this program. Perhaps it's just me, but what do you mean by one-time cost?
It's not reoccurring cost. A lot of times we talk about continuing cost. The cost that you see as far as one-time cost in Loganville and Clayton and for the investigators or the equipment, the purchase of a computer, the purchase of the weapons, the actual vehicles, the desk and things of that nature for the centers. So it's costs that come the next fiscal year. If it were in the 08 budget, would come out of the base because we would not need to replace the vehicles. We would not need to replace those things.
So it's for equipment and
yes, sir,
stuff relative to the operation of employees?
Yes, sir.
And how did you come up with the number of 26 new positions?
Kathy, I may need some help on the breakdown on positions. I don't know that I brought that with me. Once again, the staffing pattern is directed by the size of the facility and the demand. You may have to jump up here and point it out to me, Kathy, real quick. Okay. I believe if I can do math real quick, simple math here, that we have 22 of the positions dictated to the Loganville facility, which is an 8,500 square foot facility, which would be a CDL testing site as well. And the reason the majority of those positions are there is because of the services provided. We're going to have at least 3 examiners that will be doing CDL testing only, as well as providing the full complement and the full operational center. So it's basically modeled off a similar facility such as the one in Conyers, which doesn't provide CDL, so it'd be their staffing pattern plus the CDL staff. And then the one in Clayton County, I believe, is 3 positions, and it's a 3,500 square foot facility, which we realize the demand is not as high, and that's what dictated the number of positions. And it's modeled off of similar centers like Cedartown and others that operate similar capacities that we expect.
Okay, that's 25.
Did I miss
another
one
question, briefly, can you explain what you do with Homeland Security?
Yes, sir. As far as Homeland Security goes, we have been identified by the federal government in the Real ID Act to be basically, as we've talked about Georgia Secure ID, to be the entity to recertify individuals in the states. It's not a mandate on states, but it's one that does impact the states. And here in Georgia, we're going to have to make that decision whether we comply or not as far as having met all the requirements once they're released. And it's an extensive list of requirements that I believe will be released once the Department of Homeland Security identifies those. Currently, they have done it and released it to the Office of Management and Budget, but they haven't released it for the review of the states. We hope within the next 60 days to review those. But we work very closely with our public safety partners. A large portion of our activity deals with the driver record when someone's pulled over on the side of the street. We're working very close with them as we develop our new system to actually release the photographs of the driver to the law enforcement officer. There's no reason that today we shouldn't be doing that, but currently we do not have those technology capabilities, and it's because of the way the current contract is written, not because you can't do it. We all realize that you can move pictures between different entities. But as we move forward on the RFP that I mentioned earlier for the new driver's license system, those type of things is what we focus on as far as Homeland Security goes, because the integrity of our document is really what's being utilized across the states as well as a nation for a Homeland Security purpose as well as for a driving purpose.
Later, if we could get together and have a few questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner, we don't have any further questions. We thank you for your presentation, and we'll be in contact with your office if the committee develops any in the meantime.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.
Chambers.
Okay, now we go to Department of Corrections.
She's got a career in game show hosting, I believe. Come on down.
Well, you know, actually, she really makes this group look a lot better.
Thank you.
Well, Commissioner, we're all
locked. Someone get anything today, right?
Commissioner, we're all locked up here for you.
Well, Chairman Martin, members of this distinguished committee, thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to you today about the 07 amended budget. And I think I'll begin with with a few remarks, and most of it's about the great men and women we have out in our communities that are manning our facilities and the streets, keeping us safe on a daily basis. Few people really understand the size of the Department of Correction and its impact in the community. 15,000 strong, but 10,000 correctional officers who are out there in the community. And thanks to you and others, last year we got a little bit of a pay raise, and that brought a smile of delight to their eyes. And as I've talked to many of you, there is still a little unfinished business because we thought the pay raise would raise the bottom line. And I just plant that seed in your mind as we go back at a later date and look at the 08 budget. There is some unfinished business we need to do for those young men and women. We're excited about what the governor is going to offer in that 08 budget, but we're here to talk about finishing out the year. I think characteristics of the quality of people we have working in our department is I returned from this weekend attending an American Association of Correctional Officers, and while there I had several of my colleagues from different states come up to me and talk about the reputation Georgia had. Indeed, my commissioner counterpart in Indiana was amazed at what we were doing with the resources, the limited resources we had, and has mirrored many of our programs on his own. So I think that as we move forward here, what this amended budget is about is sort of sustaining the momentum of last year and what we were able to accomplish through your help and the governor's help. Things that allow us to continue to be on a right azimuth to be the best managed Department of Corrections in any state government. I think the only thing that has changed, though, and drives some of the issues that in our amended budget is what is happening to our prison population. Indeed, you've probably heard or read that we're in a little bit of a growth crisis. That crisis results from an additional 1,200 new inmates above what we've had in the past, and now we find ourselves poised behind the state of New York, who has about 63,000 locked up. We're approaching 60,000 when you include the detentioners. We are now the fifth largest population, surpassing Michigan, and we're only the ninth largest state. But we understand why we do that, because we all want to be safe in this community. But on top of that, we've had a little bit of a meth epidemic that is upon us. We're taking in, as a reminder, 250 to 300 intakes a month. And as you do the math, you can see that there's 2 prisons worth unless we're able to somehow influence that process. And then you add that we adopted some of the toughest laws recently, and for all the right reasons. Sexual offenders laws, while they won't have a dramatic impact on us for a few years down the road, they already have in several second and third order impacts in the way of some of the staffing and in the way of how our business processes are going to have to be done in order to meet this additional requirement. And then when we plan our prisons for the future, what we are forecasting in the future in terms of increases as we extended the time they will stay with us is something we must look at today to make sure we're prepared. My biggest concern right now in the amended budget is that last year we shared in the cost of doing business and had to give about $3 million out of the 07 amended budget, the admin portion of our budget, to share in other priorities throughout the state. And as we find ourselves in the amended budget, that $3 million brings us to some of the situations we find ourselves in today and being a little bit short in certain areas. But what I'm most concerned about is that when we've had shortfalls in the past, we've had to ride these shortfalls on the shoulders of the great men and women who are personnel staff in our prisons. I don't know if y'all know this, but 60% of our budget is about personnel services, and that is ironic in the sense that we're also probably, by comparison to many other states, underpaying many of them. But anyway, we get to this point, and there are about 4 things in the amended budget that I'd like to talk to you about today. It's about beds, it's about utilities, it's about catastrophic medical costs, and it's about the private prison CPI. Beds are our business. When you look at Department of Correction, you ask what our core mission is to keep them. And without beds, we aren't able to do that. Last year, the governor gave us $48 million, and the General Assembly supported $48 million for 4,400 new beds. We actually opened 4,900 new beds. Part of those beds were opportunity beds that we got from places like Pelham Prison. And so this year we come back. We were determined not to leave any beds open necessarily that were efficient and ones that we needed to meet this prison growth crisis, and Pelham was one of those. And so throughout the amended budget, you will see some minor changes in the budget driven by the fact that we brought on Pelham's bed. The other aspects of beds is Bainbridge. The governor has a strategy that suggests that not only do we need enforcement agents, 15 new ones to help enforce meth trafficking. We also need bed to help take care of those men and women who have serious medical problems. So he's given us over the last couple of years 400 new beds for residential substance abuse beds. So we go a little bit deeper in the process of rehabilitating the men and women who have drug issues. And so you will see in Bainbridge is an opportunity again. The Bainbridge beds will show 192 beds there that allows us to open that facility in 1 April and continue to treat those men and women who have severe drug issues. The other issue that is before us is utilities. We have, through some major efforts in our facilities, driven down the cost of our utility rates by 3%, but the rates rose, for example, in natural gas 15%. I think we are a microcosm of society in that regard, in that we're all perplexed about the growth of utilities. I think that is something that y'all all understand why we'll need that money. Similarly, the catastrophic medical care continues to grow. Last year when I spoke to you, we were targeting the top 100 catastrophic cases in our institution. We drove that down by 7%. So we have 7% less people on the list of people who are major cases. However, the growth of medical care grew by 22%. And again, we share in the frustrations that some of us have in the community at large with how we maintain health care for our families. Ours is how we maintain a constitutional level of health care for the inmates in our system. And so we come back to you. We asked the governor for $5 million. In his typical fashion, he always challenges us to do better, and he is recommending in this budget $3 million. So we will live with that $3 million and continue to run a constitutional prison. Finally, the other major contributor to our amended budget is private prison CPI. I want to just share with you the opportunities that are created with private prisons. Private prisons can often be more efficient at getting us beds on short notice. So as we were perplexed by how we were going to get these 4,400 new beds, the private prisons came on board and gave us 520 beds. And they didn't give them to us in a way that suggested we were desperate, and if they wanted to take advantage of us, they could take advantage of it. For example, CCA gave us 320 beds at a cost of about $19 a bed. Now, they were able to do that simply because they had the infrastructure in place already, and they, like we have had to do, they probably exceeded their capacities. We're now in Georgia prisons about 103% of capacity. So they were able to do that. In a similar response we got from Cornell, I got to tell you that our partnership and relationship with Cornell and CCA is the best that it's ever been. And they are, perhaps some of you all have heard, even looking at building another federal facility across the street from D. Ray James down there, and folks and the people are all excited about that, and we're working with them to facilitate that, and that's going to be some job opportunities for people in Georgia. But anyway, those are the major areas that you'll see in our budget, and if you would go to the budget starting on page 38, you will see some of the things that we're talking about there. The first one is the administration part of the budget. And I think I talked about Pelham and utilities impact. Those are small costs in terms of Pelham. This is sort of an annualized requirement. Startup funds for the Pelham operation, about $2,000, and then you see the utility costs there for the entire prison system. Look now at Bainbridge below it, the substance abuse treatment. We talked about how important those 192 beds are going to be to us. Food and Farm just is an annualized cost for Pelham. Moving over to the health side of the house, we've talked about the catastrophic growth and the 22% increase in that and what we are doing, working with the governor's office to keep that down. And we talk about parole revocation centers. We talk about prisons, private prisons, CPI, and probation detention centers, probation supervision, all of primarily utility costs, state prisons, utility costs, and of course the Pelham beds, transition centers, utility costs. And those are the highlights of our amended budget. And so I want to thank this group again for your help last year. As we move ahead, we're hoping that you will give us your support for this amount of money so that we can sustain what we want to become is the best managed state prison system in the nation.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a couple of questions. Just let me say for the committee members, the Commissioner was going over based, as he mentioned, those itemized numbers from the governor's budget recommendation in a bit more detailed form than you may have seen if you were following your tracking document on page 11. The numbers are the same. The numbers foot, but they're rolled up a bit in our tracking document, not detailed as much out as they are in the governor's recommendation. We have a couple of questions. Get this right one day here. Chairman Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Donald. On the CPI, 4% CPI paid to the private prisons, I don't know if you're contractually bound or what. I'd like to know the answer to that. But also, how do your current employees feel about 4% CPI going to them and they might get 3%?
Well, the answer to the first part of your questions, we have historically paid them their CPI. It's basically been a handshake. I don't believe we're contractually bound to pay it every year, but I would emphasize to you that they are a good investment, and for the same reasons I think our employees would also be interested in it. I don't make a distinction between our 3 private prison employees and our state employees. They're all great Americans. They're under contract with us. When I go in there, that's their biggest concern, that we would discriminate against them. As we do look ahead to the governor's budget, you know the governor has put in there.
Excuse me, if we discriminate by paying them more, are we not discriminating against state employees?
Well, we're not really, because what we're going to do, I know that you understand in the governor's budget this year for 08, he is recommending a 3% pay raise for all of state employees, including Department of Corrections. As an add-on, he's given us a little bit of flexibility in our personnel budget to add to that to the tune of 0.5% of the total budget, personnel budget, and that's going to be, we think, a little money left for us to do right by employees. The other thing that happened this last year, as you recall, thanks to your great effort in the 07 budget, 1 January, most state employees experienced between a 4% and a 7% pay raise. And correction officers, on average, were about 6% pay raise. So the state employees experienced that pay raise during the 07 budget, which is the budget that we're talking about right here.
I have 2 more questions, Commissioner. Let me make sure I understand this. The suggestion or the proposal for the 4% is not necessarily a 4% pay raise for their employees. This is a 4% all-in operating the prisons, utilities, all the things they do. It's not, you're not proposing to give them a 4% pay raise only for their personnel. This is a all in. Like we're seeing a pay raise if we can do it for corrections, but we're also seeing an increase in utilities. So the 4% is not a personnel increase. It's an overall operating a closed loop facility for us. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We have a couple more questions here. Gentlemen, I believe I've got the order right. Chairman Willard, and then we have Chairman Knox.
I want to just follow up with what Chairman Day brought about. I was surprised to hear what you're saying. This is not a contractual agreement we have. This is just something we decide upon from year to year what we're going to do with these private contracting companies.
Okay.
Is that what we're doing?
Let me refer to my assistant commissioner right quick. Am I correct that it's not contractually bound, but it is something that we have historically done to support?
The term of the contract says that we will pay CPI up to a cap of 4% if appropriate. Let me repeat that just because it probably didn't catch it. There is a contractual cap up to 4%, but one legislature can't bind another legislature except subject to appropriation.
Sure.
Okay.
That's right. I had the numbers down wrong. I believe Representative Powell had the next question.
Thank you, Commissioner. Could you tell me what's your current authorization number of employees, especially your correctional officers?
We can get you the specific numbers, but correction officers, rounded up, has been about 10,000 correction officers in the Department of Correction.
Could you also get the numbers on how many are unfilled?
Yes, I can get you that number.
Do y'all currently have a freeze?
No, we do not have a freeze on correction officers. As you know, the legislature generally funds us at 8% of our 92% of our requirement for personnel. So we are always in a 8% lapse situation.
Could you give us a little bit of insight about how that's affecting programs? Everything from, for instance, mobile construction to work details, to getting these folks out, getting them out working.
Yes, I can give you that feedback also, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, how many beds do we currently have in the entire state? Do you have the knowledge of that?
I think the number is about, if I recall, about 55,000.
This is about 55,000. Okay, good. Thank you. I've failed to ask that in the past.
But let me make sure I give you the exact number later on.
Okay, good. Let me follow back up on the 4% consumer price increase that it's there. If I remember that correctly, we have pushed our private partners back in the times when our budgets were lean and we were trying our best to make ends meet. We pushed those private partners down, and they obviously, although they're at our mercy, basically the way that we actually fund those systems, and they've reduced their cost per bed space over those times.
Sure.
And then we went back and actually asked for additional beds. And they graciously came in, and basically what we're doing is offset some of those costs for those additional beds with this consumer price increase. Is that really what's going on there?
Yes, sir. Actually, I want to make sure that's clarified. I know there are a lot of people out there that might think that what was said was they were going to get a 4% increase in salary, and I think the chairman pointed out very clearly that consumer price index takes into account all of the operational requirements inside those private prisons. It's not necessarily a targeted pay raise for private partners.
One further question. I'm just curious about the increase in utility cost. The $7.3 million, and it's really, I'll show my ignorance here. But we're doing this in the amended budget. Is this actually a shortfall for what we anticipated the cost of utilities from last year? So I don't know what the cost of utilities was, but you're basically asking us to pay an additional $7.3 million. So the increase is that much?
As we said, we had some savings that we made on our own, but for example, natural gas went up 15%. I'm sure perhaps you experienced that. And everybody should understand, when you look at the Department of Correction, we have a $2.3 billion infrastructure. We have over 1,900 buildings of all kinds. And so when you begin to look at the percentage of increase relative to how huge we are, 120 different facilities where we lock people up in, that all contributes to a 15% increase in natural gas or other costs over here really contributes to the growth in the budget. And I think realistically, when we go forward with utility estimates back when we did the budget in 07, everybody's hoping optimistically for a good outcome. And unfortunately, we've probably historically had less than good outcome in the last 3 or 4 years on utilities.
One further question by me, Mr. Chairman. What is the CNG savings? I don't understand what that is in your utility cost.
Let me try to do that for you, Commissioner. The Committee for New Georgia has listed savings through all of our things of savings the Committee for New Georgia found. I have asked OPB to provide this committee a list of all the departments within our purview of what those savings were, where they came from, so that we get to look at those funds and they don't just find themselves into other programs.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir.
In the interest of time, we're going to go straight to Ms. Chambers.
Okay. Well, we have the Department of Law with only one item, which should be a quick explanation.
Come on down. This is our opportunity to get back on schedule.
Tough as nails.
No pressure.
You got the right man for it.
We just hope to never see you in your professional capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Attorney General.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is a very, very quick item, and you will get back on schedule if it depends on me. We've just got one item in the amended 07 budget. As you all know, we've had the responsibility by law to manage the Hospital Acquisition Act. And in the process, we incur costs to do that, primarily for the use of expert financial consultants who have to come in and do the valuations of the assets. We historically, in the past, we had the ability of the legislature would put the money in the budget and we would pay for the hospital acquisition cost out of that. Recently, that's not been done, so now we have to go through the process of incurring the expense for the expert consultants and then come back to you to get the money to reimburse and to pay for those expenses. So we had a couple of acquisitions that had costs associated with them for the financial consultants, and so in the amended 07 budget, we are really just paying the bills that have already been incurred, $124,000. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Does the committee have any questions? Any questions in regards to this item? We'll give them 3 shots. Any questions for the Attorney General?
It's not a hard one.
It's not good, Mr. President.
Well, we have to ask you about something. No, I'm just. I appreciate it. I also will say this. Appreciate your staff coming and talking with me earlier in the week and last week and bringing me up to speed. If there are no questions, I won't belabor the point. We thank you for coming down and thank you for having us get back on schedule. We'll keep that in mind when 08 comes around.
All right. Thank you.
Ms. Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We now have the new chief of the appellate court, Judge Barnes. I'm going along with my game show announcement thing.
Thank you.
No pressure, Judge.
I'm Charlie Michael. I'm a judge of the Court of Appeals. This is our Chief Judge, Ann Barnes. Also with me is our Clerk of Court, Bill Martin, and our Fiscal Officer, Jan Kelly. As you all know, we're an intermediate appellate court below the Supreme Court, above the Superior Courts and the State Courts. We had our feelings hurt when we were recently referred to in the media as, quote, the dreary salt mine of Georgia jurisprudence. But we're happy to have that label. We do work hard. We're the busiest appellate court in the country in number of cases per judge. We have 12 judges. Traditionally in Georgia, to keep our overhead low, when the population has grown, the number of Superior Court judges has grown, the number of State Court judges has grown, and of course they hold trials and the loser always appeals. To keep our overhead as low as possible, instead of adding new judges, which are expensive, we've added more support staff. We're very grateful to y'all for your help with that in the past. One big help you've given us is, for security reasons, we've moved all our judges now to the judicial building as of this morning. And y'all authorized security cameras in the 06 budget. We're very grateful to you for that. To move our judges to the judicial building, we moved the clerk's office to the old health building, and that did incur some expenses, which y'all authorized in the 07 budget. Our 08 budget, our supplemental budget has 6 items, and I'm happy to go through that line by line if you want to. Does the committee have any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Committee, if the committee wants, I mean, you have before you in page 4 of 18 of your tracking document the request from the court. We'll go with this format in the interest of time if the committee so desires. I'm not sure who I had first. Chairman Willard.
Judge Michael, I was asking earlier this morning of the Administrative Office of Courts, and I'm going to ask each division the same question. I am sure information must have come out from the state as far as the amount we were recommending as across-the-board pay raises of 3%. Every one of the judicial offices is put in for a 4% pay raise for employees. And I'm trying to find out why and where did this originate?
Yes, sir. We are asking for that. As you know, we use permanent staff attorneys, not lawyers right out of law school, and we're competing with the private sector, which pays $100,000 for lawyers to start and a $50,000 signing bonus. We have a very low turnover, thank goodness, and we feel that we need to compensate our employees in a way that reflects their extreme hard work and their professionalism.
I appreciate that. And if they're not being paid enough, then we need to look at doing something as far as adjusting their pay grades. But this is what I'm asking about is a straight across-the-board salary adjustments of all employees, and I'm just really having some problems finding out why and where the decision made that all employees of the various offices, Administrative Office of Courts and those under it, will come in asking for 4% as opposed to what was a suggested word that went out from the state. We're going to recommend 3%.
Yes, sir. I want to emphasize that we don't answer. We're not under the Administrative Office of the Courts. We're not, quote, the judiciary. We don't have programs and commissions, and we can't answer for them. Our judges met, decided to compensate the employees 4%, and that decision was completely independent of the Administrative Office of the Courts, and I can only plead guilty and plead it's an absolute coincidence, and not certainly we did not coordinate with any of them. All right. Mr. Chairman.
I can say this. Hey, Charlie, how are you?
Great.
He's a constituent, so I'm going to go
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On the rents.
Yes, sir.
What is the GBA charging per square foot, and what are you paying per square foot for rental for the judges on the third floor that you did?
The vague answer to your question is we're paying too much, but the exact figures I'll defer to our fiscal officer.
As you know, the rent increased as of the House Bill 1027 last year, and that's all we're asking for is the increase in that. They went up about $2. I just need to look just a second. About $2 a square foot that we had not anticipated, and so that is the difference that we're asking. I think the renovated space is going to run about $14.50 or something like that.
Which one are we talking about?
Excuse me?
I guess my question had two prongs to it. One was the GBA rentals, and I don't know who you pay for the judges on the third floor of the judicial.
That's all we pay. That's our only landlord is the GBA. Last week, that might have been different, but as of this morning, we are all in GBA owned properties.
Okay. You have two different requests, and I'm trying to get an idea of the cost per square
I thought this morning, perhaps for clarity, we should have combined those, but there's probably some technical line item reason from last year.
Probably because the committee asked for it.
We actually have a rent increase, and then we have a repairs and maintenance increase, and they are two separate items. The rent increase has to do with the increase of the Georgia Building Authorities, what they charge us for rental of space. And last year...
What is that per square foot?
It's two different prices. The old unrenovated space is $12.30 a square foot, and it's $14.39 for the renovated space. And that was effective as of July.
You have room for judges, and you have room for office space. Am I reading this correctly?
Are you looking at the
Tracking sheet.
fifth line item would probably increase for real estate rent, and then the other is adjustment for the, actually the other is not rent, it's repairs and maintenance. The last item is incorrect. It's repairs and maintenance. We actually had a building project going on in order to bring the judges back from the Equitable Building, and we had been given a budget, and the Georgia Building Authority exceeded that amount.
To follow up on Chairman Day's question, I've had discussions with Chairman Parsons about GBA is within his committee, and we're going to talk about how those rent increases are coming back as really a backdoor budget increase to all the departments across the state.
Yes, sir. They passed that on to us, and we just come hat in hand to y'all.
Yes, sir. It's the way they don't have to ask the state for money. They get all the other departments to do that.
You're completely correct,
And
Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
sure they have expenses that go up. We're just going to
look into
again,
that.
somebody's writing a check and we're having to cash it. So we're going to talk to them about that. The committee have any further questions for the judge? Any questions? If not, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Shouldn't have asked that last time.
Well,
yes, sir.
I was just curious about the two positions that you reinstated. Why were they eliminated, and now why are they coming back?
My understanding is they weren't eliminated. There just wasn't enough money in the budget, and we were asked to be extra economical that budget year, and we were, but the positions have always been there, and as I mentioned, we only have 12 judges, so we try to have enough support staff. I have 3 law clerks and a secretary, and 2 of mine job share, so I have 4 law clerks and a secretary, but we need every position we have, and in fact in the 08 budget we're asking for 2 additional positions, but we just have such a workload. I feel like the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike sometime, but those positions were not technically speaking eliminated, they just weren't filled.
Well, I guess we'll probably have to ask our analyst to help us with that, because the language stated that it actually was a reinstatement for positions that were eliminated in the 2005 budget.
It's a reinstatement of funding. In 05 budget, there was a payroll shift. We did not have those positions full at that time. They were not filled. When we came back at the end of the year supplemental, they asked us to reduce our amount to what we actually had to need for that year, and therefore, and we didn't get it in the 06 budget because we waited until we had the space where we could actually increase our environment. We just actually, waited to fill those positions till we really were critical that they had to be filled, and they were never eliminated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's nothing further, we have no...
we fill those positions now, and we're grateful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honors.
Thank you.
All right, we move on to
on, Dan.
pardons and paroles.
Well, I could claim Garland Hunt as my constituent, but he's upgraded. Speaker Pro Tem Burkhalter, I believe, represents you now. But welcome.
Welcome. I'll be politically correct and say that my first and favorite representative is Chairman. So good to see you, Mr. Chairman. And likewise for this prestigious committee here. We don't have much either. We're just going to stay to the 07 amended budget here, but it's a biggie for us, and I think you've heard me talk about it. I came on as been on the board since January 04, and I was just incredibly impacted by what I've been, I guess, on my soapbox about is the 55 tons of paper that our system is based on. If you look at our 07 amended budget on page 79, and that's where we'd like to start here. Our organization is actually broken up into two divisions there. We have an ultimate responsibility for enhancing public safety. On one side of it, of course, is the concern about effectively transitioning offenders back into our communities. The other side of it is what we consider our effective decision-making process and informed decision-making process. So we had our clemency online navigation system has come to the forefront of our priority, and that's the one item that has been somewhat jump-started at the governor's recommendation in the amended FY07 budget. And there you would see actually in this process, you can see, I think that the recommendation is $88,315 in the 07 budget. The overall cost of this, of the total project, is to have such an impact, it has such a small dollar amount, is only $2.6 million, and to be spread out actually over a 4-year budget cycle. But our current system, of course, is just basically, frankly, antiquated. We basically have what we call our oldest system that it's a 30-year-old mainframe system that has been very limited in terms of what its response would be. And I've talked about this, and it has afforded us basically a linear process that we've had with walls that has allowed us only to work one at a time. So I want to focus in on just what the advantages of this is. It certainly is going to be something very more costly, cost savings for us, as well as time. One of the things that we never want to think about, but it certainly is a real consideration. Even coming over here today, I left in my office about 200 to 300 files that are yet to be voted on, and they're sitting there waiting for me to go back, and they say welcome when I come in the door. But those files are there. Right before someone came with a little note, and they said to us, can you find Willie Walker? Willie, where's Willie? Well, his file is somewhere in there. And so as we look for those files, it just really enforced to me that that this system has to go up as soon as it possibly can. Our records are probably, and I think even once before as we were talking about this, Vernon Keenan even substantiated it with GBI, that our files that we have is probably one of the most comprehensive repository of files on any inmate in the state. We hear them coming in before they even start their sentence. We spend time getting their history, their social statement. We interview their families. We have information all the way back to the juvenile records. I mean, the records that are in that file are very valuable, and many times, if you notice, the PR, the news reporters, everybody wants to come and see what we have on these guys if we allow them. So for our decision-making process, this is mandated that we move forward and put the pedal to the metal. And we would not ever want to think about any disaster coming, but in our day and time, it's something we have to be considerate of. And with our prison system being at the point that it is, I mean, you're talking about over 105 of capacity. I mean, it's at the point right now that any day, much less a month or any sense of time where, God forbid, something like what took place in New Orleans took place, I mean, it would be catastrophic for us to be able to have to recreate this system when it's also paper-driven. So in this regard, we recognize that every week we have over 450 new commitments that are coming into our system, and they're coming through the court systems and with revocations on parole or probation, and with all those things, if all of that were to stop, it would be very problematic and a very expensive endeavor. So based on what we've seen, we have gone through GTA worked through our sources to make sure that we're compatible, working together, of course, with corrections and other agencies to make sure we'll be able to read our system and work together. So we feel like we're on track now with a system that can be certainly very, very beneficial to us, not only to our own agency and our own decision-making process, but also even to other agencies that we work very closely with. Without rehashing some of the things maybe I've said before, I'll certainly be open for questioning as far as that's concerned, because this is the one item that is on our 07 budget that kind of has been recommended for a jump start for us.
Does the committee have any questions in regards to this? And the primary item for pardons and paroles for the 07 budget is it's really it involves $88,000 in new money, but it's $168,000 in spending overall for the system. And it will involve, just so you know, we're in 07 day, it will involve a substantial expenditure in 08. But I think the gentleman makes a good case, and if the committee would like to hear more about that in detail, I know it's probably covered in the report you've given. But if the committee would like to hear that more in detail, I'd be glad to schedule that. Any questions? Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Oh, pardon. I just had to say that.
We will pardon you, Chairman Day, but don't hold us to that.
All right, it's time for the prosecuting attorneys. Folks that put them in the prison system so that they can go to
I think we were a bit out of order.
Go to pardons and paroles after that.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Richard Malone. I'm the Executive Director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia. We have the responsibility of administering not only the budget for our agency, but for the district attorneys as well. So I'll be making our brief presentation today. Also with me is a member of the council, Steve Kelly, the district attorney from the Brunswick Judicial Circuit, and our budget analyst, Charlotte Davidson Parrish. Ours is extremely simple as far as the 2007 supplemental budget request. We have asked for, and I'd like to answer the question about the 4% pay raise thing.
You are a wise man beyond your years.
Well,
that was probably going to be asked again.
I wanted to start right out there and
yes,
say
sir.
It was widely reported at the time of the budget last year that there would be a 4% raise. We have 1,000 employees who read and heard that they were going to have a 4% raise. Only when it came time to come put your budget together and ask for the money to do that, did the up to 4%, at least we were informed, was 3%. Our counsel was then found themselves on the horns of a dilemma whether to ask for the 4% that they felt like that their employees were expecting, or the 3% that they were told would likely be appropriated. Faced with that dilemma, they chose to go with what they felt like the employees considered what they were due. That's your answer, right or wrong. That's the answer. And so that is the reason we have asked for the 4% pay raise for district attorney employees as well as for prosecuting attorneys county employees. Of course, the district attorneys are elected officials, and so their pay raise was not 4%. It's 2.89%, and that is included in our supplemental request. Additionally, in the supplemental request for district attorneys, last year the legislature graciously approved a $7,000 pay raise for the elected district attorneys, and that is in there as well. The other items are the increased funds to reflect adjustments in employment share for health benefits and for workman's compensation. Additionally, money was put in this budget in contemplation of 2 new judgeships, that being Cobb and Dublin judicial circuits. That is the customary practice when circuits get new judges, that they are funded in the supplemental budget subsequently, and that's the situation, and that's that $151,130. That would mean 2 assistant district attorneys, 1 for each Cobb and Dublin circuits. As to the prosecuting attorneys council, the numbers are basically the 4% pay raise for the employees, the adjustment to the health insurance premiums, to the workman compensation premiums, and then the $1.422 million, and I'd like to explain that very briefly, if I may. In 2005, as you're aware, the Prosecuting Attorney's Council budget was vetoed. It was $5.4 million at that time. We were instructed at that time to make a request to the Fiscal Affairs Committee to transfer money from the District Attorney's budget into the Prosecuting Attorney's County's budget for the purposes of maintaining our operations for the first 10 months of the fiscal year. That's what we did. That was some $4.1 million, leaving a shortfall for the remainder of the year for 2 months of over $1 million. When those numbers were picked up next year as a base budget, the 10-month figure was picked up rather than the entire budget for the year. So we started out with a base budget that is $1.4 million short of the base. And so this is simply correcting the base from the 10-month budget after the veto taken from the DA's budget into the Prosecuting Attorney's County's budget to put it in the Prosecuting Attorney's County's budget as it should be. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I would mention one other thing. We have been in some discussion with some members of the House regarding the impact of the sexual predator bill that came on last year, a great initiative of this body. And we have been discussing the possibility of adding prosecutors across the state in an incremental basis to reflect the more need that we have as a result of those cases. I'll point out a case that Mr. Kelly mentioned the other day. It's the way the penalties are in the sexual predator bill are very severe, and it's almost like there's no real reason for a defendant who's charged under that legislation to negotiate any type of settlement or plead his case. He has nothing to lose when he rolls the dice. That's fine. That's fine. These people should not have much consideration from society. But it does require that cases be tried that normally would probably plead to a different sentence. And so we are in discussions with that. We're not asking for any money for that in this particular time, but we are in discussions with that with the leadership concerning those matters. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Are there questions from the committee? Questions?
Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Moving right along to the Department of Public Safety.
Oh, my goodness. Colonel, no pressure, but the last three presenters got us back on schedule. So.
And I've got 15 minutes, and as you glance through your supplemental budget there, you see that there's only one item that appertains to us, and that actually is a $286,000 appropriation that, as I explained the other day during my presentation before the Joint Committee, the Department of Public Safety used to have many different facets to it, and when some of those different divisions left and became independent agencies, we still maintained the financial and human resources functions, and the Post Council, the Georgia Public Safety Training Center, and now the Georgia Police Academy and Office of Highway Safety. All their human resource functions and their fiscal functions are under us. And this $286,000 appropriation that you see in the supplemental is actually for Post Council and a new initiative they have with a data system.
He was serious. That's all they need.
Well, that's all that's in there. I mean,
yes, sir. I mean, for the 07, and we've had discussions about a number of items you have coming up in 08, and I think you're going to be invited back. I know Chairman Day has been doing some work with you in the off session. I know he'll want to come back by, and we want to afford him that opportunity. But I think you got a couple of questions. Representative Porter, is that you down there?
I think I saw Alan. You're going to ask the same thing about as we prepare for 08. Could we have the same information that was asked for with GBI of how many positions you have open and how many positions, and break down the category that you're allowed? This is something we started looking at last year. Jill was a big part of that as well, and Alan, on being able to retain people in public safety in Georgia. Just for years, this is where everybody wanted to be. And that shifted because of what the demands that the county governments and sheriff's office and police departments. And it's just something that from the state, we ought to be the pacemakers again and pace setters in public safety. And to do that, we're going to have to do something with these departments. Now, that's really an 08 question, but if you would get that prepared in the same way the other, I think that would help us policy-wise.
You mean how many people we have?
Right.
I can give you that right now.
I think the question is, where your authorized positions are and what vacancies you have, in administration down through the officers on the street.
I have everything but administration. I know from every other division in our organization how many people we have, how many we're authorized, what the difference is.
I think if you could provide us that in writing, and I think that goes to the gentleman's question of what we had talked about earlier in the week, and I'm sure you've had conversations with him on what it costs to train these individuals, and we're losing them, and
after
reasons
I had
why.
my conversation with you the other day, we did run some preliminary figures on just troopers and troopers first class, and how much we spend to train people, and how much that's cost us over the last 4 years. And our training cost for that period, for those who have left us, is over $10 million.
I want to make sure everybody heard that. The gentleman said our training cost for those that have left our employ was $10 million. So as we talk with him about making a case to do some things to for employee retention in that area, I think he's going to be able to make a very good case.
But our personnel that work in field operations, that's the troopers, the communications officers, the Capitol Police, the safety officers that staff all the state buildings around here, and the Motor Carrier Compliance Division personnel, we're 421 people short. From our authorized strength. We've never been up to authorized strength in the budgeting process. You certainly have to have a little flexibility there with money, and you can't fill every position.
If we have that on a sheet and a grid, I think it would help give a picture of what needs to be done. Also, there was a building that was transferred from Lawrence County from corrections to public safety, with a public safety training center. I'll get with you later, but I'd like to find out what the status is.
Bill, I'd like to follow up on the request that you and the chairman had asked. But if y'all could, I'd like to see if y'all could provide us with an itemized breakdown, just in the state patrol ranks, but in the other ranks as far as the motor compliance division. I've got a special interest in this. I systematically, in my opinion, having served on this committee for 10 years ago, I've systematically seen a systematic movement that I'm real concerned about. Last year we tried to do an enhancement on salaries, and part of that didn't get to where we thought it was going to go. Part of the troopers didn't get it, and it's created a rift of some sort. But I'm real interested in, after the DOT presentation the other day, it's the first time in 18 years that I've seen the Department of Transportation taking on the position of highway safety more than the Department of Public Safety did. When they talk about increase. And of course, my only perspective is with that is certainly not the condition of our highways, but the shortage of officers that are patrolling the roads. When you give a breakdown, if you could be very specific in giving us a breakdown on the administrative officers as opposed to the actual troopers that are out there patrolling highways. Something that I think it's, as a premier law enforcement and most of us are law enforcement agency, I think it's high time that we do some serious repairs to the budget in this area.
Well, the reason I include the communications officers, as I explained the other day, if you run, when you're staffing, if you don't have sufficient communications officers, what we have to do, and we don't in most posts, we have to put a trooper on the radio to do communications, and that further depletes our ability to staff the operational people that are out on the road. And I think, as I recollect the other day, it was like 3,000 or 4,000 shifts that we had to take people off the road and put them in communications because we didn't have appropriate number of communications officers.
Just off the top of your head, could you possibly just give this committee an idea once you take the officer ranks that have administrative duties and all those various assignments, you take the annual, the turnover, the unfilled positions, troopers that are out sick on a daily basis, how many troopers do you think are actually patrolling our highways over a 16-hour period? Because I don't think we have very many that are on duty from 12 to after 12 o'clock.
Unfortunately, we've closed down most of our posts after midnight. We maintain an operator. Call forwarding has assisted us greatly, because what we do when we close one down is we call forward the phones over to an adjacent post, and all the phone calls go in there. And then what we do is we have call cars. So we have a first and a second call, and if something occurs, and they get them out of bed and they go out and respond to it. But I'm not so sure about money-wise that I would be able to speak to it right now. But it's as far as staffing, we've got 48 patrol posts. Typically, they work from 2 to 5 counties. My guess is, and the other thing that people don't consider is shift work. We at least work 2 shifts a day, and in some places on I-75, I-95, I-85, where we have continuous traffic, we do still run them 24. But when people think when they talk about staffing that it's 8 to 5, and you have everybody out there working, and that's not the case with us. And all our people work Saturdays and Sundays, and they work the holidays, and everybody else is off. So once you start figuring, our people get 116 days off a year. That's 52 weeks at 2 days plus the holidays, 15 days sick leave, 15 to 21 days annual leave. They probably spend 15 to 30 days in training. We keep about 20 people all the time that are out with injuries. This is a rough and tumble job, and we have people that get hurt all the time, and they're out for long periods of time. And I would say that probably there's very seldom more than 2 out in any post at any given time. Many times there's one that'll work 2 to 5 counties. And I had a letter yesterday that I got from a very irate citizen that was coming up I-75 during the holiday period and thought that somebody was drunk, and she called our Star GSP number, and they didn't have anybody close by, and she went on to the next post and didn't have anybody close by, and she saw all the zero tolerance advertisements, and she wonders why when she calls that she doesn't get somebody out there immediately. And if there isn't anybody in close proximity, we call the county and the city, and traffic is primary typically when it's a DUI like that, but traffic for them is secondary most times.
Chairman Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to see you again, Colonel Hitchens. If I could start out, and I'll try to be brief, that's hard for me to do, but Ms. Chambers and Mr. Bernard and I were on a study committee looking into law enforcement salaries and across the board, and I believe all of us were, the committee unanimously was convinced that we don't have just a problem here, we have a hemorrhaging nightmare when it comes to adequate law enforcement, and that we are well under market due largely to a lot of the compression problems in the way we are paying. There were questions that came up in the committee about, well, how would you explain why the state patrol would get perhaps more money or a raise or a phased-in raise than any other employee? And the conclusions, as I recall, were that the expectations are greater, and that Homeland Security alone is driving your needs up. The cost of ongoing training, and by our numbers, it costs more to pay more over a period of time than it did to continue retraining new people. And I just throw that out there for the committee's consideration. This is very serious, and I'm slow to say that, but I know that everybody on that committee tried to do their homework, and a lot of work went into that committee getting down to the facts, and it was something that we regrettably had to conclude that this is something that is, in our minds, a foremost, what should be a foremost priority in our expenditures, because nobody's going to want to travel here if they can't feel safe here. And what does that do to attracting people to Georgia, be they business or tourists? And the ripple effects of not being able to do what we're just bound to do by the Constitution are very, very significant. I hope that we can, you will also produce numbers for this committee that will show, unlike the GBI, you don't have a recruiting problem. You have the recruiting problem and the retaining.
Right.
The GBI just has the retaining. And if you could just get us up to date on where you need to be.
Well, and, you know, there's such a deviation across the country about how people are staffed and what they do, and every state's somewhat different. But I think you've probably seen some of the figures, and you know, just as we look at our neighboring states, we've got 760 some troopers now. Florida has 2,000. North Carolina has 1,800. South Carolina is 4.5 million people, and probably a third less in geographical size than us has 1,000, and that's pretty standard around. You know, some of the bigger states have significantly more. I think California's got 7,000. New York's got about 6,000. Pennsylvania's got 5,500, and some of them are state police. And they do a lot more than we do, but we don't fall. I think I talked a little bit about our people getting the award last year for traffic safety and the way we're organized and what we do. But we're in Category 3, which means it's based on the number of troopers that we have, not our population in our state. And we compete against states that are typically much smaller than us because they have less numbers of troopers. These other states that I talked about, Florida and North Carolina and South Carolina and Virginia, they're all in Kentucky even, they're all in a larger classification because they have over 1,000 troopers.
Well, we have, as I recall, about a third as many per mile as the entire population as a whole. But anyway, I better stop there. I'll wait until we go into detail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was very pleased last year, Colonel, that this subcommittee supported, I think in a very strong way, some efforts to correct this compensation problem. But picking up on Representative Powell's comment, it seemed that maybe we missed the mark out there. And so while you're putting numbers together, if you could get us something that shows what positions did get the increase and those that we missed, I think that would be, at least I know it would be helpful for me.
I gave that out the other day, but I've got a copy of it in my car. Okay. But essentially what happened was the House version was that everybody would get the pay raise. The Senate version was that only line entry people would get it, which were troopers first class, the entry-level people in motor carrier compliance, and entry-level people in the Capitol Police. Now, when the budget came out, what really caused me a lot of consternation was that it actually said this House version was adopted, but it had the money in there for the Senate version. And the bottom line is, when you have to, you go along with what the money is, you can't spend money that's not appropriated. So we went along with the Senate version that only had entry-level people. So, I'll tell you the other thing that really concerns me is there's no quick fix to this. If we started trying to recruit people today, before we'll ever have them on the road, it'll take over a year. By the time you do all the background investigations and the physical fitness and polygraph, psychological evaluations, and 33 weeks in school, it takes over a year to put somebody on the road. So the longer we go into the hole, the further behind we get, and the longer it takes to climb out.
Chairman Knox. I'll pass. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't see any further questions. Colonel, we really appreciate you coming by. We appreciate your offering for 07, and if there are questions related, I'm sorry.
If that's the case,
if you would push your button so I can turn you on, so to speak.
If that is the case, could you also see, for the supplemental budget purposes, what it would do to fund what we thought we were funding in this year's budget? So if it was short, it was short, because we all left here thinking the House version was adopted. And if that's the case, then if we could see the difference, and if we could do something in supplemental that part, if we try to do something to correct the bigger problem.
Now
Because you're not going to attract people to get into the schools until we fix the bigger problem, is what you're facing, even if it is a year. If we don't do it now, it'll be 2 years.
Well,
But if we have that immediate thing, let's see what the difference, and let's look at supplemental correction.
I can tell you with his fire department.
We'll let you. Well, I mean, we'll let you get back with us when we the House budget. Or just in the interest of time, we'll move along. But I hear the gentleman's request, and you guys can get that for us, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to DJJ.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be before you today, standing in for Commissioner Albert Murray. He's out of state this week at the ACA conference. He holds a leadership position in ACA, which we're very proud of, on the governing board and the board of accreditation, and had some meetings that he had to be to this week. I appreciate you allowing me to stand before you. I'll cover the 07 amended budget, which is on the governor's budget document starting on page 66. I'd like to thank you, particularly this committee, and the work you did last year on bringing about the additional pay raise for law enforcement staff. We have over 4,300 employees in DJJ. We operate in 30 facilities and probably 90 or so community court service offices all over the state. Our major job classes, juvenile correctional officers and juvenile probation and parole specialists, were part of that group of people who received that extra money. It was greatly needed in some job classes where we also experience extremely high turnover, extremely high training costs, and risk security and safety in our facilities. As you know, we continue to operate under a memorandum of agreement with the federal government. As the commissioner mentioned the other day, we are standing ready for final inspection with the Department of Justice. Have felt that we've been in that situation for quite some time and are just basically awaiting their return for final inspection. We believe by the end of the calendar year, but we're still on their schedule, we should be out of the MOA, which is a huge success for the state of Georgia. It's taken a long time and a lot of money, but we now believe we operate some of the best programming in the country. We still have our challenges, as you'll see in our 08 budget, around making sure we have enough beds for those juveniles who need to be in a bed after good assessment processes, and also community-based services that make better sense than a bed when that's appropriate, and certainly supervision levels so we can keep track of these youngsters when they're on the streets. Again, we appreciate your help with that last year. You'll see some of those requests to continue those efforts in our 08 budget. In 07, really we have just two types of increases. A number of items are realignments or adjustments to staffing and moving money around between programs. There are no net increase in funds in those requests. It's just moving things around. I'll cover those kind of once instead of under every program. Then we have just a couple of items around operations in our facilities, our YDCs and YDCs. The governor asked us to come with just the must-haves. That's what we've come with for the 07 budget. If you'll notice the alignments, the first alignment basically is around just moving some money. We moved our assessment and orientation function from YDC operations to more being managed by our behavioral health staff. We felt like we could get better assessments, better coordination between medical, mental health, and security in handling those kids as they come into the YDCs. All we did was move people and money from program to program, no net increase in funds or positions. The second item is just an adjustment to our position count. Over the last couple of years, there's been some inaccuracies and some positions that have just been left out. The funding is there, the people are there, the positions are filled, just the count is missing, so it just adjusts the count. We're realigning funds for a full-time psychiatrist position. We currently use a per diem type arrangement for a psychiatrist. We pay her. She's board certified child psychiatrist. We pay her on an hourly basis to provide administrative oversight of our programming. She's agreed, and I think within the same budget, we're in a position to bring her on as a state employee. She's looking for a little bit of benefits as well. So that combined cost of salary and benefits is still within the cost we were paying per hour, and we'll have her as a full-time employee, FLSA exempt, so we can work her as many hours as we want. And she's willing to do that, so we think this is a good deal for the state. Our next alignment item has to do with moving some funds around to cover. We received 12 new investigator positions in last year's budget. This year's budget, we appreciate that, to investigate incidents in our facilities. What didn't come with them is some support costs, regular operating, motor vehicles, some things like that we're finding the money within our own budget and moving it around. Again, no net change in position count or funding. The only two items that actually increase the amount of money we're asking for, page 67, item 3, deals with the renegotiation of the Savannah River Challenge YDC contract. That contract was rebid last fiscal year. The bid prices came in the neighborhood of March. We met with the governor's office as well as this committee's leadership as well as the conference committee about that. Our decision, or their decision, everyone's decision was to move forward with the new contract price starting July 1 and request the additional funding in the supplemental budget to allow us to continue to operate that program. That's a 150-bed YDC where we put the short-term 60-day program youth down in Screven County. They do a wonderful job for us, and even though it is an increase in cost, it is still a very competitive price for that type of work. Our next items, both in YDCs and RYDCs, have to do with covering utility expenditures. 1.1 million total, 550 in each program. I've been with the Department of Juvenile Justice about 5 years, with OPB several years before that, and I do not recall an increase in DJJ for any type of regular operating increase, including utilities. I know since I've been there, we have done a number of things to try to manage. We've looked at our facilities. We've tried to do cost containment planning. We've worked with the utility companies to try to give us the best rates, strike whatever kind of deal we can. We found one-time money. We were able to earn some additional Medicaid funding from one source and freed up some state funds, but that was one time. Last year we had to do a fiscal affairs and move some money out of residential programming for youth, which was something we really don't want to do in the state. Times come, we just have to have some more money for utilities. We can't continue to try to shuffle. We're out of cards. So we're coming asking for the first time in a long time for a little increase in utilities so we can keep our facilities operational. And that concludes our 07 amended. I'm certainly open to any questions you may have.
Thank you for the presentation. The committee have questions in regards to the 07 budget. Have questions? I think you may have drawn the right place in the agenda, or an extremely succinct and well done presentation. I'm sure it's a combination of both. If the committee has no questions, we'll
we swapped with corrections gladly.
Well, there you go.
I'll take their money too, by the way.
Be careful what you ask.
I think we've all been spending that.
Yeah. Thank you. I think the last we had on our agenda was DOD. They called the office yesterday. I don't know that you guys want a few minutes. I think the information at the office were you didn't have an 07 change, but happy to have you.
Thank you. We'll take this very quickly. We do not have a request in supplemental this year for the first time in a while, and we are glad to see that. I would like to let you know that in our 08 submission, and I know we'll get a chance to present that later, we are looking at the governor's recommended increasing the size of the Youth Challenge program in Augusta and fully occupying that program. It was originally designed for 200 kids per session, twice a year. It was funded due to lack of federal funds originally at half that size. We have the facilities there. The governor's recommending the staffing and resources to increase the size of that program consistent with the equal to the size of the Fort Stewart facility. We graduate over 600 kids a year out of that program, and it'll increase it to well over 800, possibly 900. There may be discussion a little later in the session on some minor supplemental funds to match some federal money to start in the March class rather than having to wait till the September class, since that cycles March and September. But we're not making requests at this point to try to jumpstart that increase. Our other requests are all around facilities improvements, bond funds for a state share of match for a new headquarters building out at Dobbins. Many times you consider bonds and supplemental versus the regular budget, and those are important for the state to put its match money on the table to assist in getting that federal appropriations in the upcoming MILCON budget from DOD. Other than that, our funds are all focused on improvement of armories and continue that process. And we cannot tell you how much difference it's made in the Guard for the kind of improvements that have been made in the last 7-8 years in those armories. I think all of you have armories in your districts, and all of them have been improved and more valuable to the community and to the Guard, and we appreciate the support of this committee and the General Assembly, and I appreciate your time. Any questions?
Well, we appreciate what you guys do. As somebody said earlier, the public safety folks are out there when we're all, warming in our homes around the holidays, and they're out there on the streets, and we know the things that you do for this state are often overlooked, even in the times we're in now. We appreciate that. Committee have any questions for the gentleman? Yes, sir.
I'm curious if you may not be able to provide this at this moment, but in the future, if you could sort of provide us with a list of what you're looking as far as armories you may anticipate closing in the next 5 to 10 years.
I can give you a little information if you want it now, or would you rather have a more comprehensive presentation?
Yes, if you don't mind, I'd rather have it.
As you're aware, with the help of assistance of many in the General Assembly, the governor, and local communities, the Guard is obtaining NAS Atlanta in full, a BRAC base and adjacent to Dobbins. We'll be occupying that over the next 4 years, with the better part of that coming to the Guard 3 to 4 years out. That's one component in our long-term restationing plans. Apart from that, the 48th Brigade returned from Iraq last year after 18 months of deployment. And with that, DOD began changing the brigade from a heavy to a light brigade. That is decreasing the size of that brigade by about 650 soldiers. Most of the brigade is in South Georgia. That is causing us to look at two things. One is our long-term recruitment sustainment, where the population of Georgia has shifted northward over the last 50 years since the armories were built in the early 50s, mid-50s. And the other being the change in the brigade. We have, with agreement of communities and legislators, closed about 8 armories over the last 8 years, all in cases that assisted the community based on their request for our property or our facilities. That has been consistent with the shift northward. With the obtaining NAS Atlanta and the change in the brigade, we're looking at 2 armories that may be in discussion this session. And coincidentally, both the communities have come to us requesting the armies be transferred, both for the hospital authorities' use, both on a kind of emergency basis. This is consistent with our long-term plans and is coincidentally advantageous to us. We always prefer to look at armory closures based on the community's need for our facilities. So in this case, it would be a win-win scenario. Other than that, I don't see us closing very many armories additionally in the next 4 or 5 years. The Guard is doing very well. Our recruitment is among the highest in the country, if not the highest in the country. With our shifts into higher recruitment areas and migration northward, we expect the Guard, apart from the 48th Brigade decrease in size, to increase by 20% in the next 5 or 6 years. So we think that will allow us to fully occupy NES Atlanta and retain the bulk of the Guard. Many of you be getting calls because part of the change in the 48th is also changes in units. Consolidation of certain units. Instead of 4 engineer units, we'll have 2. And with those changes, there will be shifts in where soldiers are located. And that is probably causing as many ripples as closing armories, and that they don't want to move from this armory to that armory. And it comes down to, we'll have 2 armories with engineers, not 4. So there will be some shift and consolidation, and we're trying to make that as painless as possible. But I'm in communication with several of you now, and we'll continue to be through the session. And as I said, I think 2 years ago to this committee, and again last year, we will make every effort for armory closures to be closures that are consistent with the wishes of the community. I'll give you one example. We're now looking at a closure in Jessup, where we were looking at a closure in Glenville. The Glenville community badly wants an armory to stay there. It's a key part of that community. They support them. We looked at our long-term plans and shifted from closing Glenville to closing Jessup. Jessup is an emergency issue with the hospital authority. They want that facility. They need it badly. They can't meet some construction costs otherwise. So we're shifting to try to make that. We will always try to make it a win-win for both the Guard, for your constituents, and I think we've done it in this case. So I don't see any major surprises coming your way, unless there is a change in total manpower issues for the Guard nationally, which we don't see right now. Maybe more than you want to know. But
No, that's good. Thank you.
any other questions?
Committee have any further questions for the gentleman? If not, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our agenda and our business today in this meeting. Let me make a brief announcement. You'll get an email or ever how you've asked to be contacted and a notice on your desk tomorrow that we will hold a brief, and I do mean brief, probably 15-minute gathering upon adjournment tomorrow around a conference table. Is what I'm looking for, that type of environment, simply to give us an opportunity to make sure we have captured everything that the committee has asked of the agencies. Just a real brief recap of the questions you asked and the agencies you'd like to have back for a longer time for discussion, either for 07 or 08. So there will be, just for the public's notice, you're welcome, and the notice will go out. You're welcome to join us. There will be no action taken, or there will be no presentations made. But of course, you're welcome to come. But it's just to make sure that we have recorded properly what the committee would like to see and the information we get when we next get together. We'll do that on adjournment, and we will be briefed tomorrow afternoon. If there's no, yes, sir.
As far as recommendations, you're not looking at that?
No, sir. I'm trying to make sure that we just captured what we have today as far as the questions that the committee answered, and that if we need to have those departments back again, that we have time to do that on Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, just to give us time, to give everybody time to go home tonight and really think about if something's come up again, or something you thought about, that we can get you that information. We're not going to I'm not bringing forward any recommendations. We're not asking committee members to do so. No presentations from any departments, and no action will be taken at the meeting other than to make sure we've captured this, the intentions of the committee members here, and get you the information you need. If there's no further business before the committee, we'll stand adjourned. If there's no objection, without objection, we are adjourned.